Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to talk about a pretty special and somewhat expensive headphone. So just to warn you, this is about a $2,000 headphone MSRP, but it is a wonderfully competitive headphone in this range, and you'll learn more on why as we get further in this review. So this is the Headphone 2 and Headphone 2 GT. It's from a company called HEDD Audio, and they are very similar to each other, but there are a couple minor changes. The biggest thing I want to point out is they are very similar on paper, and even though there's a minor 1 decibel difference in sensitivity, I can tell you that the GT does need a little bit more power to drive because of the passive changes they've made to alter the sound quality. Consider the original Headphone 2 as more of the studio-focused audio tune, if you will, whereas the GT is a little bit more V-shaped. They say it caters more towards audiophiles, but I think it's more towards the general consumption where people tend to like a stronger bass shelf and a little bit more upper mids and low treble. I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's the biggest two differences. There are going to be some minor tweaks cosmetically, and the price difference of $200 between the two obviously separates it a little bit. Now, before you judge this exclusively on the list price, I will say that headphones.com have these both on sale right now for an even better and more competitive price of $1,700 for the GT and $1,400 for the non-GT. That's at the time of filming this. I have no idea if that's going to carry over to the HEDD Audio website or if it's just temporary on headphones.com. But just in case that changes anything, because that does put it against other headphone price brackets, it's something worth considering. Now, these boxes are huge, so we're going to focus on the unboxing, quote-unquote, experience before we get into the headphones themselves, and I want to show you this because it's quite unique. Now, the original Headphone 2, it's going to be the same unboxing experience between the two. You just get a slightly different accessory offering with the price change. So you get these like pull-out drawers, and if I open this up and take the lid off, you can see a really nice presented accessory package. Now you have a few different cables. You have a 1/4-inch adapter, and this is a longer cable. They're sleeved with dual TS 3.5 millimeter terminals. It's the same thing as the balance cable. And then when you use the 1/4-inch adapter, you have an optional step down. So this will take the 1/4-inch and step it down to a 3.5 millimeter. So depending on what you're using to drive this, you can easily use the included adapter. And this is presented quite nice. It's a pretty unique take. Obviously adds a lot to the packaging size and weight, but I do appreciate how, luxurious and special this feels. Now, I already have one of these cables out, but if you look closely, this is going to be a segue into the cable differences. The GT has a softer, more of like a nylon type material, kind of like a shoelace material, so it's a little bit lighter feeling and more flexible. It's also a more satin-like smooth finish, very much more like a fabric, whereas the original one has a rubber coating that feels a little bit sticky in comparison. You can also see the memory effect is quite different as well. So the older cable that comes on the original 2 has a little bit of a stiffer memory effect on the wire. Now this is a 4.4 millimeter 2XLR because the cable that it comes with for the balance side is terminated with the 4.4 millimeter Pentagon, and of course it's still a 3.5 millimeter TS. Now you will also notice that this comes with an extra set of pads. There's no tuning difference with this. It's literally an extra set of pads, so it's kind of nice to get that out of the box so you don't have to buy an extra set later, because pads do wear out over time, and that is going to lead me over to the GT. Now both of these guys, as I'm putting this away, have a 5-year warranty. HEDD Audio is really big on the support and reliability of the headphone. So, and all their other audio products, because HEDD also makes really nice speakers. They do full Atmos packages, and they also have like a lot of stuff designed for the studio for mixing and mastering. That's kind of where the company started, because these use AMT drivers, which is not a common thing on a headphone. Now, looking at the case of the original 2, this case is big, but I love the quality and presentation of it. You even have this like little flap right here, so you can tuck the wire of your choice into there. You can fit a couple extra accessories in, but it gets a little bit snug. So if you already know what you're going to use, like the headphone and cable of your choice, you can package that up quite nicely. So you are getting quite a bit on the accessories side, more than a lot of manufacturers give in this price range, or even higher. So that's the 2. Now I have most of the accessories pulled out of the GT box, but I still want to show you it just in case. So same idea. You have these like little drawers that you pull out, and then if you open the accessories lid, it's presented the exact same way. Not reinventing the wheel here, but it's still obviously a pretty special experience. And I'm going to take this off. Now, the difference with this guy, I already mentioned the cable differences. The other set of pads are suede as opposed to the leather pad, and they are tuned somehow to sound the same of each other. Measurably, there's going to be a little bit of a variance, but that's that can happen just from moving the headphone around slightly. So I didn't want to say that these measure different. They are almost identical to each other on my measuring rig. I frankly just love the way this material feels on my ear, so I would naturally lean towards the suede. And because these are open back headphones, you don't have the differences of noise isolation to worry about between the suede or the leatherette. You know what? I'm going to leave these out because just in case I want to use that later. So accessories, pretty much the same way. It's the same idea with the 1/4-inch step-down adapter to the 3.5. The difference is, to me, you get a nicer cable in the GT box. Case is identical as well, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you still get the same stuff that you'd expect from the regular 2. Okay, so we got through the accessories. Now it's time to talk about the headphones themselves. And I did buy my own cable. I've been using the 4.4 connections in general lately, just because it happens to work on a lot more of the variety of DACs that I have. I've typically liked XLR because it's a really solid connection, but I purchased the RME 24 Pro SE DAC. And I like that DAC because it's super simple and compact on my desk, and it has enough power on the 4.4 output for even headphones like these, so naturally I gravitate towards them. I just like the way it looks when you go with a custom cable, and this wasn't too expensive. It's a basic one I bought on Amazon. Now, as far as how it compares to the GT from the regular 2, there's going to be a lot of similarities here, and you can see that one difference is the original 2 has a flat finish on the yoke, and it's printed in like a silvery white color that says HEDD. Whereas this one, there's no paint color differences. It just says HEDD, and it's kind of embossed in. These both still have a carbon fiber headband. The difference on the GT, at least my unit, the GT carbon fiber seems a little bit more exposed and pronounced. You also have contrasting stitching on the leather pad, which I'm sure if you're looking at this, this is quite an exotic looking headband design. And it's not going to be for everybody. I'm not one to say or judge a headphone off of a subjective looks take, because everyone's going to have different preferences. This is obviously more industrial, more robust looking build. It's certainly not designed to be sleek, but there are some really interesting ergonomic designs with this headband. For one is it's not quick to adjust. So if you are constantly changing heads or multiple people are using the same headphone, it's going to take a little bit of getting used to for quickly adjusting this. This is obviously better suited for one particular person, so just keep that in mind. Now, there's these little straps on the side here, and when you reveal it and take the top one off, you can see the other strap underneath. That's because they do two different things. The top strap is actually affecting clamp force, so you can see how it kind of goes through onto this headband, and when I open it, do you see how it kind of gets pulled down? That's because it's not obviously attached right now, which means there's less resistance on the clamp force, which is why I didn't measure the clamp force of this. Now, these weigh 550 grams. They are not light, and that's comparable to some like of the heavier Odyssey headphones. The ergonomics of this are still quite good because of this strap design, but even though you can adjust clamp force and the perfect sizing for your head, there's no getting around the fact that it weighs over 500 grams. I still found these comfortable for gaming, but when I first put them on, it is a little bit jarring because a lot of the weight is purely on the ear cups. The headband is extremely light, so all the 550 grams are mostly concentrated on your ears, which does have a different feel than the Odyssey headphones. Something like the LCD-X, I feel a little bit more weight up top, whereas this particular guy is, yes, the headband is helping to hold it, but because the weight is a little bit more concentrated on the cups, I feel just a little bit more pressure on my ear. You can't go with too loose of a clamp force with these because of the weight, otherwise it won't feel as secure. You also won't get the same seal, and that will impact bass performance. So once you've dialed in your clamp force to your liking, and I did like these with a stronger clamp than I normally would, just because I want the consistency of the sound. I want it to feel really secure on my head. This strap underneath is to adjust your height. So again, once you get it dialed in, you shouldn't have to change this much. The good news is once you've dialed it in, it's always going to feel perfect on your head because it's not only adjusting for the clamp for how wide your head is and how tall, but you can kind of set the placement so it's just right on your ears. Because of this design, I actually didn't have too much of a variance on frequency response. So if you shift it around just slightly, it didn't really change the sound quality much, but I still recommend, dialing it in perfectly. These rotate and have a hard lock. Basically, if I had to guess, maybe 30 degrees, and then they also pivot. So you have like a swivel and pivot. They're not super loose. Obviously, it's loose enough where the weight of the headphone's going to make it move. But if I put it on like this, you can see it's not necessarily conforming to my head. You do have to kind of snuggle it in a little bit. and to kind of get it to feel right. It's not just quickly throw it on your head and it's going to be a perfect fit. I don't mind the ergonomics of this. I think the biggest thing is just getting used to the weight, but this strap design, it's kind of like a suspension strap, but it also has padding, which is not a common combination. So, and it's a memory foam with a breathable fabric, just like it is on the standard 2. And even though that jarring feeling when I first put it on, like you do notice the weight and some of the clamp that's a byproduct of that, I could still listen to these for a long period of time. Now, there are modifications physically to the driver. Obviously, you can see the white screen versus the black screen here. The screen thickness is slightly different on the pads, and the pads are so easy to remove. It's basically like a pressure fit gasket. And I want to show you the difference of the original 2, which is on my left, and the GT, which has that white acoustic fabric, if you will, over it. So you have an exposed driver on this particular one, and you basically get, this is kind of lead into sound quality, but by doing the passive tuning that they did with the GT, they lost a little bit of the efficiency of the driver because they're modifying the sonic properties of it to help boost the bass, reduce some of the mid-range, and boost the treble. It's kind of interesting how they did so much purely on physical tuning. Electrically, these are the same drivers. They have the same electrical impedance and effectively the same frequency response. It's just tuned to have a more pronounced V shape on the GT as a byproduct of this. And whenever you do physical changes to a driver, you know, post electrical manufacturing, you can lose some efficiency because you're creating a filter or some physical modification to the sound. I do like that this uses standard 3.5 millimeter terminals. So on that note, it's nice because they're also kicked forward. So even if you went with a pretty hardcore cable, you're not going to deal with microphonics issues. Even the stock cable that came with the GT, or the original 2, I thought might have been more microphonic, and it's super minor, but there is a slight difference in microphonics there, whereas I prefer the new cable just because it feels lighter. I do want to note too that when you put this on, because these are angled and these pad dimensions are quite large, it's not the tallest or widest pad, but for me it had more than enough space for my ears, and again, it was really comfortable. But because this is a symmetrical design, you can accidentally put these on the wrong way. So just make sure that the wider part is going towards the back of the driver on each side because you want them to angle slightly forward. That's the way your ear kind of sticks out. So it's there for comfort and sound. Speaking of sound quality, let's get into the objective side first and focus on the measurements, and then we'll discuss the subjective qualities and what I hear and have enjoyed or disliked about it. So I use a Gross KB006X Pentaclone and a 711 coupler clone to measure these. And it's basically an ear simulator. And I say that because if someone else has a different ear simulator, different testing methodology, etc., that they won't measure identical to this. This is just how my rig measures it, and how you hear it and how I hear it can vary a bit, especially in the higher frequencies. So I just want to point that out. The good news is I've measured a huge variety of headphones, even in this price range and above. So if you want to compare how the Headphone 2 and 2 GT measure compared to other things, I'll have a link in the description below so you can kind of shop around and sniff some graphs on your own time. Now I just went straight into having both measurements show up at the same time, and this is the Headphone 2 in blue and the Headphone 2 GT in green. I talked about the GT having a little bit more of a V shape, more of an excited sound tuning, and you could see it on the graphs. Now there is a bass lift on the GT, and the strongest bass lift happens in the mid bass, so right about 100 Hertz. There's a little bit more of a scoop in the mid range comparatively because of this, followed by more emphasis in the pinna gain area. So when you approach 3000 Hertz and 4000 Hertz, the GT is more forward. This is closer to a more traditional sound signature that a lot of people are used to. Still has the same or very similar upper treble presence and air to it, but there is a big difference on how it presents. It might seem minor to some people, it just depends what you're comparing it to, but it was quite a different presentation, and I liked both for different things. Now you can see some sub-bass roll-off on both units. AMTs don't typically have a lot of bass. A lot of full-range speakers use AMT for tweeters, not sub-bass, and that's a little bit of a modification here. Head Audio uses VVT technology, which is designed to variably adjust airflow in the driver, because an AMT, just think of it as like a particle accelerator or sound wave accelerator, because air moves through it 4 times faster than a nominal movement of a traditional driver, and that kind of excites the air and what creates all of these frequencies and sounds that you hear. Now, because of the way AMTs work, they typically didn't have as much bass, and their whole VVT technology, not variable valve timing or any of those Honda fans out there, VTech. So, but the byproduct is they were able to lift some of the sub bass as a result because of these technologies. HED is huge in the AMT space. They really understand how these drivers work and how to get the most out of them. That's why they've been able to pull off such a pretty amazing sound signature for using an AMT. So here's where it gets crazy, and I want to talk about subjective sound quality and what I hear. And there are different situations where I prefer the original two, and there are some situations where I like the GT more. Obviously, anytime you have more of a bass shelf, songs that benefit from that are typically going to be more enjoyable. And there is a little bit more sub bass present with the GT, but because the mid bass is lifted, you don't have as much of a sub bass lift as the mid bass. And as a result, the bass is a little bit less linear. It is stronger, but the little bass that you do get, when I say little, the lesser bass that you do get, seems more linear even in the lower frequencies, at least how I heard it. This is partly because the vocal presentation is darker on the older two. And by doing that, it's almost like you're shifting the sound signature downward slightly. This is a more excited, the GT, brighter sound. Vocals are more forward. They have more energy. They have a little bit stronger S to them, if you will. Everything sounds a little bit snappier and livelier, and you have a similar air region on the trailing end of the higher frequencies. So they both sound relatively spacious. The difference is this has a more relaxed sound, and it sounds a little bit more intimate, and vocals are more centered. And as a result, sometimes I feel like it's more concise and more well connected to what I expect that song to sound like. The GT opens it up a little bit, which is a more traditional approach that I've talked to before. And this is going to lead me into some comparisons. So I'm going to try to save comparisons for its own chapter. But I have a couple hi-fi mints here, and I also have the Sennheiser HD 800S, as well as one other guy I'll bring out in a moment. But, Hi-Fi Mint has a similar idea to the GT. You have a nice little bit of a bass shelf, and then the upper mid-range and low treble is more emphasized, has a more airy presentation. This has a stronger vocal presentation even than the Hi-Fi Man headphones because it's more emphasized at 2 and 3K comparatively to this. But there is still a little bit of a recess after that before you get into the high treble. So it doesn't come across as like overly sharp or have too much bite to it, but there is noticeably more treble. And if you listen to a song that's a little bit more excited in the first place, something that may not be mastered really well, it's going to expose that with the GT, whereas the standard 2 tends to be a little bit more forgiving of more sibilant tracks. And depending on what track you're listening to for vocals, I actually prefer the older 2's presentation on the vocals. And because if I want something to have a more intimate sound, the standard 2 has a better representation of that, whereas the GT is kind of like tastefully modifying it to a lot of people in a good way to open it up and liven it up a little bit. But I lose that sense of centeredness that I got with this guy. I like the 800S. It's a very different presentation. There is a little bit of a snappiness to it at 6,000 hertz that really gets me, and I have to EQ the 800S because of that. Once you've done EQ, I really like the dynamic punch of the 800S, and the bass quality is actually quite good. It sounds a little bit more spacious than all of these headphones. It's no surprise that particular tuning of that headphone is designed to create more of a speaker-like stagey effect. But what's really crazy is I listen to a lot of speakers every day, and I listen to a lot of the same tracks when I'm rotating speakers to, maintain a solid understanding of them. And the standard 2 more closely represented some of what I hear in speakers as far as recreating the room, especially with certain live recordings. So just because a headphone is modifying the tonality or adjusting frequencies to make it sound wider, it doesn't always fully represent what that would have sounded like either with a speaker system, or doesn't always mean that you'll like that more. So there are colorations that sometimes it clicks and it makes things better, and there are other times where you actually want something a little bit, more neutral. It's kind of a cop-out word, but this is doing less to color the sound, in my opinion. And as a result, you may not always get that wow factor that you get with like the GT or even the Aria headphones. I also compared it a lot to the HE1000 SE, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But I just like that the standard 2 seems to play everything to pretty great enjoyment, and that's without doing EQ. when you do EQ, if you just add a bass shelf, just a slight, lower bass shelf, like 100 hertz and lower, I prefer the standard 2 overall, even over the GT. Now, packaging wise, I like the cable of the GT more, and I like the suede pads. So if I could have had the standard 2 with the suede pads, that cable for like $100 more kind of would have been a no-brainer for me, because I typically embrace EQ. There are times though where the lack of sub bass on both of these is apparent, especially when you compare it to other products like HEDDPhone, which these planar magnetic drivers have really good speed and resolution, but they get into the sub bass. And that leads me to comparisons, because one of the tricks with the AMT driver and the HEDDPhone 2 and 2 GT is resolution and micro detail. These things are astonishing at picking up the most subtle detail of a song, and not doing so by boosting the treble or amplifying certain frequencies so strongly to make it seem like it's more detailed. It's doing that through the ability of that driver to move extremely quick and replicate the most subtle, nuanced stuff that happens in the back of the music that a lot of lower resolution headphones don't typically do. So one thing I've always praised HEDDPhone for is how clear and resolving they sound, especially for the money. Both of these guys are under $1,000 now. This is the Aria Organic and the Aria Stealth. I did a lot of A/Bing with these two in particular. I started with the HE1000 SE. Absolutely love that headphone. A little bit older now, but I think when I started doing more A/Bing with all of these, I expected the Aria Organic to go more toe-to-toe with the GT. I was pleasantly surprised at how much I liked the standard Stealth more in this particular case. And that's because the problem, what HEDD has done is it's constantly making me learn about sound and headphones. I don't feel like this journey ever ends. You're always discovering new things. And the way that this can pull out really subtle details without being as bright as something like HEDDPhone, these sounded fantastic, especially when the bass was asking for it. But every now and then the wrong treble would sneak up on you and it would be like cloyingly bright and a little sharp. So with HEDDPhone, I'd have to EQ some of that treble down, whereas with the head audio, I would just EQ some of the bass up. So it's a different kind of EQ approach. The issue with the HEDDPhone headphones is it's a different result depending on the track when it comes to treble, because depending how it's mastered, you can have a big difference in reproduction. And so you don't always EQ it the same way. And when you reduce EQ, you lose some of that technical quality that the HEDDPhones have, whereas this, you don't really have to worry about that as much, even less so with the standard 2. So I brought this guy out. Now I will be reviewing this, and I noticed I just put it on the stand backwards. This is the Mini Shangri-La, and it is quite affordable for an electrostatic headphone, and it comes with the amplifier, or the exciter, the system that's powering it, because this is running at a very high voltage bias. It's not using a traditional amplifier. You have to use something like this, the Energizer, to properly power them. Electrostatics are known to be highly resolving. Stax is a huge brand in this space, and typically you have to get into electrostatic to have this kind of resolution performance. The HEDDPhone to me was always like a more budget appropriate way to get to close to that level of technical performance. Obviously tuning and overall sound signature aside, but what Head Audio has done is it's the closest thing I've heard to speed and detail retrieval to a electrostatic headphone without requiring you to use a special amplifier. Now this is still a stellar value, just to be clear, because this is in a similar price range, all included with the amp. These obviously don't come with an amp, but this does not have a DAC, so you still have to buy that anyway. The thing I want to point out with this guy, it does not feel as premium of a headphone. This is the same headband found on their $100 headphones. It's the same one found on the HEDDPhone Deva, and it's not bad, but frankly, it's just too large for my head. And even on the smallest setting, it sits really low. So unless you purchase the capper strap to modify it and lift it, ergonomically, it's just not at the same level of these guys. Now, this is extremely light. I'll give it that. It is extremely comfortable once you add a capper strap to it, or if you have a larger head, even better. But the build quality and feel and, overall premiumness for maybe long-term use, not going to be as good on the HEDDPhone compared to the Head Audio. Now, it's not to say I don't like the sound quality of the Mini Shangri-La. I think for the money, the only real drawbacks I found were more in the chassis and the build quality, but the sound quality is still excellent, offering similar bass performance to the standard HEDDPhone 2, but it doesn't necessarily have the same warmth as either of the Headphone 2 or 2 GT headphones. It has the same upper mid-range as the 2 GT, where it's a little bit more forward and boosted, but it's more relaxed following that in the presence region. So certain things can be a nice relaxing sound. Frankly, I think the Mini Shangri-La is voiced really, really nice. If you're not chasing a lot of bass and you want something different, this is a really good alternative to the headphone lineup. Just again, remember that it's going to require that special amplifier that the Headphone 2 and 2 GT do not require. And then you have the Sennheiser HD800S, which with some EQ, I really do enjoy, and it has that really nice chassis feel. It doesn't feel as premium as the Head Audio headphones, but it's extremely lightweight, and realistically, the way it's built and the materials they use, it's quite durable. Just be very careful not to press in on the screens, the acoustic screens that's on the outside of the cup. I like the 800S. I would rather be wearing the 800S from a comfort standpoint. I could wear those things for hours. The Head Audio, ergonomically, it fits well, but every now and then I have to take a break simply because of the weight. However, with EQ, I've actually really liked the Head Audio headphones, and mainly the Standard 2. This is quickly becoming one of my more preferred headphones to use lately because I do some EQ, and it has a ton of qualities I like about the speed of something like an electrostatic. The mid-range presentation is just incredible. It's not punishing, and I can always add a little bit of bass if I need it. Obviously, if I really want like deep bass, I'm going to go for a different headphone, whether it be a closed back dynamic or something from Hi-Fi Man where I can EQ that up, or even the Odyssey LCDX I think is a good one if you're chasing that slam. But the real trick with the Head Audio headphones is the clarity and micro detail performance without blasting you with treble. That is a very tough thing to perform and do, and they accomplish that better than most headphones I've ever tried. So I know what some of you are thinking, what about gaming performance? And if you don't care about gaming, just skip to the next chapter. Hopefully you discover that I have chapters by now, but this part is going to be focused solely off of gaming. The GT, the upgraded newer version, has the better bass shelf and more treble, and as a result, I like it more for the immersive side of things, but not by much. I actually like the relaxed sound signature more, and I love, this is because it's so precise at having a center image. The FPS performance for gaming when I play Call of Duty, I've typically preferred the Hi-Fi Man Arias that I talked about earlier for gaming as one of my top picks overall, if you're not going with the Sennheiser products, again with EQ. Those were always stellar. But it was like, it made those sound worse in game, especially compared to the 2, because I got all of the imaging performance I wanted. I knew exactly where things were coming from. It was super precise, it was super resolving, but when the really loud scenes happen, broken glass, airstrikes, etc., because this is a more relaxed sound signature, I had the best balance of imaging performance, detail retrieval, without being cloyingly bright, or punishing in any way. So you can turn it up just a little bit more as a result and not get blasted by those surprise treble moments, making it a very good headphone to listen to from a non-fatiguing standpoint. Now, I think it's always important to note that when you're gaming or listening to anything for a long period of time, you're going to feel the weight after a while. After a few hours or more, you should be getting up to have a snack or go to the bathroom or drink some water or something. Take a break anyway, and this was still comfortable enough where I can easily still stick to my normal schedule of playing for an hour or two and then getting up to take breaks. I didn't feel like I had to jump ship and take it off early. So I think ergonomically it's good for gaming for long listening sessions, but this is always a cringe thing for me to say. I'm a gamer on the side, and I'm also into audiophile stuff. This is definitely one of the most competent headphones I've ever used for FPS gaming. And there's just been some absolute wins lately in that department. Sennheiser and Audio-Technica on the budget side have just been killing it lately for performance. This is like, if you're okay with the weight, just taking it to that next level. Not a massive difference. You're not going to triple your KD, but I'm really surprised at how good this headphone was for that. Obviously, the GT is still going to be excellent for gaming as well, but that particular tuning kind of made things more open, and because it made certain effects louder, it made the footsteps stand out less. So for a competitive standpoint, I would much rather use the Standard 2, just because it didn't have to do EQ nearly as much to be very competitive. This one was just more open and exciting, but less precise when it came to footsteps and important audio cues. And that leads me to the final thoughts. So headphones like this are expensive, and I don't think a lot of people are buying one headphone in this price range exclusively. You tend to have multiple headphones when you start collecting at this price. So I want to approach it with that assumption. Now, if you are ready to jump from a less expensive headphone, and this is going to be your first flagship product, both of these are excellent in certain areas because they're built really well. You have the long-term support from a company like HEDD Audio with a 5-year warranty, and I like how easy it is to replace the pads. I also like that they don't use any proprietary cables, so the long-term ownership and maintenance side of things is excellent on both of these. I think the biggest deciding factor, aside from weight, if you're okay with a slightly heavier headphone, is what kind of music you listen to. If you're just constantly chasing bass, if you listen to a lot of EDM and dubstep, which this sounds really good on because that bass lift, you don't really need below 30-40 hertz for most music per se. But if you're chasing more bass, AMTs aren't really known for a ton of bass. It is still very dynamic and punchy, so at the bass level you are getting, it sounds really clean and well articulated, but I don't expect gobs of bass. I would switch to something like the FIO FT1 or an Odyssey if I just wanted more of that bass line, or even the HiFiMan headphones with a little bit of a bass shell. What separates these guys from a lot of others in this price range is the resolution and detail retrieval without cheating you in frequency response. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit different, I actually think the Standard 2 for me was a more enjoyable headphone because I can just listen to everything on it. Didn't always sound special, but it was more of the generalist approach, whereas the GT with a more excited sound profile, sometimes things clicked and I'm like, holy crap, this is definitely the better headphone. Then other songs happen. I'm like, man, this is a little bit bright for me. So it's going to come down to personal preference. I think they're both excellent. They're very unique in this price range. This is a really competitive space, but there really aren't any AMTs, and there are very little that look and feel and present sound the way these do. So hopefully it's on your radar if you're looking for something quite different than what you have already. I really think it's a remarkable listen. With that being said, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I know it was a lot to process, and I hope you got the information you were looking for and maybe learned about something new for a headphone that's been out for a little bit. So thank you so much for making it to the end and for the support. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe so I can catch you in the next video. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.